Hi, everyone. Welcome to Genealogy Adventures. I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Donya Williams. How are you guys doing today? We have a great show for you guys because we got a last minute guest and she is awesome. Absolutely awesome. So, you want to say hi to anybody or you want to just jump straight through?
I can't wait to jump in. Hi, everyone. You know, you know we love you. It's such an awesome show. I can't wait to get stuck in.
Yes, let's get into it. Okay, so I'm getting ready to let me do the introductions. Miss Judith, Professor Judith Giesberg. She holds the Robert M. Birmingham Chair in Humanities and is a professor of history at Villanova University. She is the author of Civil War Sisterhood, the United States Sanitary Commission and Women's Politics and Transition, among other books. She's also the director and digital of the digital project Last Seen: Finding Family After Slavery. Now, this collection is digitizing and transcribing information wanted ads taken out by formerly enslaved people looking for family members lost to the domestic slave trade, which is what this show is about. So please welcome Professor Judy Giesberg, everyone.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me.
No
So,
problem. This is going to be an awesome show.
Thank you.
absolutely. Um, I'm really curious how this even became a project for you. How did this actually kind of suck you in and become your passion?
So these ads that we are now collecting on this site appear in the first place that I saw them was the Christian Recorder, which is a Black newspaper that's published here in Philadelphia, where I live and teach. It's published by Mother Bethel AME Church in Philadelphia, and these advertisements, I came across these advertisements when I was researching Philadelphia during the Civil War, the Black community in Philadelphia during the Civil War. And these ads are, I came across the ads just reading about what's going on in Black Philadelphia during the Civil War. And this was years ago, more than 10 years ago now. And I access those newspapers through a subscription service that we have at our library at Villanova that allows me to access these ads. And when I saw them, my thought was that these are, chock full of genealogical information that really ought to be open to the public, and one, shouldn't have to have a subscription to some sort of service in order to get to these digitized, newspapers. So it started just with one newspaper, and I at the time didn't know how big, this collection of these newspaper advertisements would be. We thought, when I started it in 2017, I thought maybe we could find 1,000 of these newspapers and put them on a website, and then folks could use them to, for genealogical purposes. And maybe, if there was one newspaper that had them, maybe some other newspapers would have them. And now we're closing in on 4,000 of these ads and over 100 newspapers from across the country.
Cool. So was it just the
4,000.
base?
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
huge. So was it just the basic humanity of seeing families that have been split apart through cruelty, trying to reconnect and find each other? Kind of, was it that human element that really kind of touched you?
Yes, the ads are incredibly moving. Ads. One of the first ones, the first one that we put up on the site is an example. It just, it's they're full of they're full of details about names and places, but they also just evoke the deepest human emotions that you can imagine. Mothers, the ones that really just got me that I saw first were the mothers looking for children who had been sold away from them, and the way they described their children. One of the first ones is a woman named Elizabeth Williams, who describes her children that she hadn't seen for 35 years, and she talks about how her love for them has survived 35 years of slavery, and she's still searching for them 35 years later. And yeah, each, the ads are, you can come to them as a scholar or as a descendant, and you also are struck by just the humanity of the way they describe each other and how they can hold on to those emotions and those feelings for all of those years.
And those emotions and those feelings, they really do come through. Even though the ads themselves don't tend to be very long, you really get a sense of the emotion the people were feeling who left them.
Yes, absolutely. They, like you said, they're really very, very brief, ads, but they do so much, work. They are family histories. Sometimes, this is the only place that you can find all of these people sort of, listed in one place, because you can't find these families listed, in a census before 1870. And then after 18, and then if they were separated in slavery, then you might not find them in the 1870 census either, or any of the ones after that. So these ads really do a lot of work, just sort of putting all these people together in one place before that kind of genealogical wall that is the 1870 census. But they also describe, again, just the way that they just a brief reference can take you back to a moment when these people lived together, or the moment at which they were separated, when they describe things. And another one that just really can just gets you is another example is, a young woman who talks about being sold from her mother when she could just crawl. So these kind of, these ways in which you mark time, everybody marks time based on sort of, the people around them and their loved ones. And you see all of that in these ads. Yeah.
And we are going to be showing a few of them, because again, even on your front page, there's some amazing examples there. I mean, people who saw their mother or their father and it's been 30 or 40 years, or other people who didn't get the opportunity to actually physically reconnect, but communicated through letters. And they're, like I said, they're so poignant and they're so moving. And having read quite a few of them myself, some of the other really important pieces of information that they contained are things like names of enslavers, names of former enslavers, places where they lived, places where they were enslaved, where they were living when they actually wrote the advertisement. So there's important geographical kind of clues and information in there, as well as the family information.
Exactly.
Yep. Right. And also just for what they used, name changes. Some of these ads, can take you through several different name changes of one person. I used to be called, Johnson, and then before that I was Williams, or, they sort of go through that. They can also give you those kinds of genealogical breadcrumbs in helping to find, ancestors.
Did you come across any examples where someone's name completely changed, like both their first and their last name?
Yes, I definitely that they're not only changing their surnames, they're changing their given names as well.
Which, as we know as genealogists, is just a joy.
Isn't that just great? Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Oh, and before I forget, how long has the project actually been going for?
We started working on it, really just myself and a graduate student at Villanova in 2017. And and like I said, at the time we thought, well, let's see what how many that we can find. And we quickly realized that the project was much bigger than could be, than could be contained in a couple of years. And thankfully we've got some support from the National Archives now. And it'll keep going for at least another 2 years. And in the meantime, we'll keep applying for more of that support. And Villanova is committed to keeping the project going as long as people keep using it, and as long as we keep finding, and I imagine we will keep finding more ways for these ads to be useful to people.
Wow.
Well, Villanova University, thank you for supporting and using. We are using it. So have you reached, so in the beginning, it was you and a grad student actively looking for the ads. Have you actually come to a point now where, because the public can actually submit them, they can go to your website and they can actually submit them. Are you finding that there's now as much of an effort from the public to give them to you? I mean, have you reached that sweet spot where you're still not, the onus for finding them is no longer just on you guys?
No, for a while, for sort of 2 or 3 years in, people were going to, some digitized sources to find the ads. But really the vast majority of the advertisements that are now in the collection, we get from going through the microfilm, which which is a big ask for us to, expect or hope that users are going to, take it upon themselves to go to their local library and get on a microfilm reader and see what they can find. So really, there have been submissions by our users. When people first started getting excited about the project, they went to newspapers.com or they went to the Library of Congress's website to, where the digitized newspapers are, and they found a lot of those there. But really in the end, what the vast majority of them, like I said, we order the paper and the students read through the papers to find the ads.
So what? Go ahead. You was going to call my name.
I was going to say, as you're asking the question, can you bring up the website?
Yeah, I'm getting ready to do that now. I'm just trying to share like we normally do. So at the beginning, Brian asks most of the questions because I'm sharing this with everybody in the process. But I did want to ask, as far as the website is concerned, how I noticed one of the things up there, you asked if someone wanted to transcribe it, how does that work? That's the transcription of it all.
Right. I'm glad you asked that, Danya. So we have a lot of participation from users who log on, because this project is crowdsourced transcribed. So that means all we do is find the ads and we load them up to the site. And then our users can sign up for transcription accounts, and they are the ones that are doing the hard work of transcribing these ads. So when the ad is first loaded up, you can see an image of the ad, but you can't search it until not by keyword or by any of those amazing things until one of our transcribers actually does the work of transcribing it, and then all of the data that's in the ad is discoverable by keyword search. So yes, if you go to the website, you can sign up to transcribe it, and you can be part of the discovery of what everything that the ads have to offer.
Okay.
Cool. And do you have a bit of a backlog on that, or is in terms of images that need to be transcribed?
So it comes in fits and spurts. So sometimes we've uploaded a lot, and our transcribers are most of our transcribers, I get the sense, are doing a lot of transcription. So they might be transcribing for us and transcribing for the Freedmen's Bureau records or some other places. So they'll do a bunch of work with us, and then they'll move on to one of the other ones, and then we'll upload a bunch of ads, and then there'll be a period of time when there's 20 or 30 ads that we've just uploaded and haven't been transcribed. The bigger, where it takes a little bit longer is that we then go through a verification process after they're transcribed. There's, your viewers will note there's directions on there about not changing any not fixing any of the spellings and things like that, or adding any returns or any of that stuff. So. But what we do is then verify to make sure none of that's creeped in, and then we upload the verified transcription, and that will take us a little longer because we send that through a couple times to make sure nobody's missing anything. So oftentimes when users get to the site, they're transcribing a lot of them, and we haven't yet sort of taken them down. We haven't sort of marked them as already, they're not completed yet because we haven't had a chance to verify the transcription.
Right.
Well, Mary McClellan says, thank you for this labor of love. And Henry Goins has this question: are the ads regionalized and alphabetized?
That's a great question. So you can, if you look at the website, you can search by region, in different ways. You can go to, I'm looking at the website. I think Danya is going to bring it up too, but I have it here on my other screen. But if you look at the website, you can go to our map, which is on the homepage of the site. You can explore the ads by the map, so you can actually just go click on the map and scroll over the region that you're interested in exploring, and little dots will appear that allow you to find ads that were taken out in different regions. You can also we also have a list of states that you can narrow it down by state. So there's both a listing of regions, and then there's a map where you can explore by region. I think that the rest of the question was, they're not alphabetized, but you can search them by keyword. And I think then you can sort your results however you want to sort your results.
Yeah. So I'm on the website now, and I'm scrolling through so you guys can see it.
So one of the ones I wanted to talk about, if you click on family reunions.
Okay, hold on. Mm-hmm.
Then, okay, well, I didn't even know this about Frederick Douglass, so that blew my mind, that he was actually a beneficiary of this kind of movement of reunification. But that's not the one I wanted to talk about. It was, Amy Morris. Just such a wonderful story.
There she is. Okay, I'm seeing her now too. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the
After
one?
30 years.
No. It's no.
Amy Frances Ushley.
Mm-mm.
I think it's Amy Morris, and then her other name is Amy Baxter. Is that what you were looking at?
That's it. Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
No, actually,
did I search her right?
No, if you go back to the homepage.
Or you can also just go to search and just type in Amy Morris if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I did. Let me get an exact match.
Yeah, it'll be there. It'll be there.
There it is.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, okay.
And again, this is the human nature of the whole thing. So she hasn't seen her mother for 30 years. And I'm going to say this is actually one of the longer ones that I've seen. And I'm going to actually go to the transcription.
Oh, here it is.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of detail here.
So just kind of reading through it, the level of detail that's there. So, so she's talking about a William Eli. So again, names immediately. So she's like years before the War of Rebellion. So we know it's before 1860. Yeah, 1860. There's William Eli Baxter. Then she's like a lawyer and a planter. So that's two different ways to be able to research this William Eli Baxter, both by his profession and the fact that he was a planter. Hancock County, Georgia, gives you a specific place now to be able to do more research about Amy. Saying that he didn't live very far from the town of Sparta. So again, if you can get land plat maps for that specific part of Georgia, you may even be able to find where his property was. He owned 150 slaves, and among them, Farabee. And the text has run out. Okay.
It's right here. Everything you were just right saying there. On the screen.
Okay.
Yes.
Then she's saying when she was 10, I guess one of his daughters married a Dr. Carroll. Carnal, sorry. She's referring to herself as a marriage present, but if you wanted to see if a deed was actually done by the young woman's father, they're called dowry agreements. Dowry deeds, dowry agreements. because again, it's getting into the whole property thing. Amy would have been her mistress's enslaved person and not her mistress's husband's enslaved
Right.
person, because that's
Exactly.
kind of how that worked. Then she's saying where she lived again. She's with her young mistress. Then she leaves. Oh, her mistress died, and the husband sold her. And I'm sure that her mistress's family was not happy about that. To Austin and Chisholm, who were slave dealers. You can research them in newspapers because they
She
always
was
put up.
very, very, very accurate. She even said how much
Mhm.
she was sold for. My God.
Mm.
Then
Yeah.
she says where she's taken to, Columbus, Georgia. So that's another geo place that you can find out more information for. Um,
She gives her
and
age this whole time too.
this
Hmm.
whole
And
time
I
she's
think that is just awesome that she gives her age because now you know how old she is and when she
Hmm.
was born just about. So,
Hmm.
and that next bit really tugged on me. I knew it happened. It was still upsetting that she was held in a slave pen for 2 months. Not a couple of days, not a couple of weeks, because slave pens were hell. There's just no other way to describe them. They were hell on earth, worse in some ways than a prison. She was there for 2 months, and she was young. But again, it just speaks to the fortitude that she survived it and moved on to the next part of her life. And she just keeps dropping. Just this is the really the rich information you get from these ads. It's just information after information. There's another sale.
mm,
Now she's in Mobile, Alabama, so she's just being moved all over the
Yep.
place.
Yep.
yeah, she ended up in Mississippi.
Yep.
Hmm.
She ran away. I mean, this one is deep.
And she's got all the names, like you said, of the the traders, and then her enslavers. She's got their first and last name of their enslavers. Um, it's really amazing, and if you think about how you hold on to all of that information, at a time when you're not allowed to have literacy and or access to the papers until after you become free. And this ad was taken out, what's the date on this, 1884, so it's 20 years after the end of the war, that she's had all of this, she's carried this all with her for that many years. All of this level of detail is
Not, and again, I have to think during the whole time that she was enslaved, never knowing she held it, but with no expectation that anything would be or could be done with it. As far as she knew, she was going to die. She was going to die a slave, and all of that information, unless she passed it on to her kids, was going to go to the grave with her.
yeah.
Um, so
Yep.
the fact that in the end, after all of this, she could reunite with her mother was it's just a really poignant and incredible story.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
and you also think about this too, that Amy either was literate, herself, was literate and wrote this down, or in order to write it to the papers, or alternately this was written by somebody at the paper. So there's also that interesting kind of dynamic where she's trusting this story to the papers, and and relaying all of this, and I think about this a lot too, like how do you know a name, a proper name, a surname, unless you've seen it written yet, right? She wouldn't have been allowed to, or wouldn't have, would have been kept away from that kind of information, but she's got it all here. 3, 4, I lost count of how many different sales
There
and
were
the
a number,
names.
but you're right. The
it
fact
looked like it was about 4 or 5 sales just for Amy alone. I mean, she went through. She told you how she went through her hell in so many words. She just literally just told you, yeah, I went from this person to this person to this person to this. She just where she was when she did it. That's just awesome. God,
and amounts of money. I mean, those were specific. It's not like kind of around $900 or $700. It was like specific.
700. 900. So that was her, and you notice she kept going up because one was like
Mhm.
1100. So that meant something. Now, in my research, if a woman by herself is sold for $1,100, she's a breeder because that's a lot of money. There's a
Yeah.
possibility that she was a breeder. And wow.
Yeah.
With that being said, she had kids that was possibly taken away from her, and
Mhm.
yeah, that's deep.
So there was one more I wanted to go over, and then we can talk about how educators can actually incorporate this into their teaching plans. And this is something that I found this morning, and I told Danya, you will never guess what I found. So if you want to go to the search bar and type in
I've
Maria
already done
Brooks.
it. I've already done it. We're ready. It's cute. I
So
just gotta give it to you.
to kind of answer Henry Goyen's question as well, I was curious if anyone, because I've used this site before, but for my dad's side of the family, it never occurred to me to come back and do it again for my mom's. I typed in Edgefield County, South Carolina, just to see if there would be any in there. Well, there were 6. 3 of them I know for a fact deal with Donnie and my extended family in Edgefield, so they're going to have to be researched. And yes, Donnie, one of them is a Williams.
Nope, I'm not doing it.
Um, but then I came across this woman called Maria Freeman, searching for her husband, William Stokes Dozier, um, and mother, Maria Brooks. Now, for those of you who've been following Genealogy Adventures for years, you know that for me, the Brookses from Edgefield County are my cousins, but for Danya, they're her
They're direct.
ancestors.
They're direct.
They're,
Yeah.
so as soon as I saw the name Maria Brooks and there's Edgefield, I'm like, yeah, this is going to be family. But this is a really good kind of genealogy teaching tool. So there's some things that kind of leapt out at me immediately, and I'm going to start at the very end. So she
Okay.
said, my name now is Maria Freeman. Address me at Edwards, Harris County, Mississippi. And this was an ad that was placed in 1881. So I immediately went to the 1880 census for Mississippi, typed in Maria Freeman. I'd guess that her age was she was born probably sometime around 1830, just to kind of narrow down, because I thought Maria Freeman, there might be a billion of them. Quickly found out there was no place called Edwards, Harris County, Mississippi. There is an Edwards Township that's in Hinds County, Mississippi. And there's no Harris County, but a Harrison County. So I didn't have enough time to search both places to see if I could actually find her. But as genealogists, that's something that that's just standard. That's just something we come across all the time. But then I went through her story. And again, she's giving some very useful information. She's telling us that she left her family behind in South Carolina about 1851. That her husband's name was William Stokes Dozier. Now, that's not how Dozier is spelled. Instead of an S, it's a Z,
It's a Z.
or I think it's what Americans call a Z.
Mm-hmm.
You have to forgive me. I've lived in Britain for a long time, and it's the Britishness pops out. So she's saying that a William Stokes Dozier was her husband. Now, again, we very rarely see people, especially formerly enslaved people from our family. They may have had middle names, but you don't really see them in documents or anything related to them. It's usually their children's death certificates that their middle names pop out. Now, William Stokes Dozier is a very distinctive name. That was a very easy name to research for Edgefield for that time period.
Mm-hmm.
I could only find one, and he was a white enslaver. And she goes on to say, but her husband was called William Stokes Dozier, and he belonged to Allen Dozier. Well, the Reverend Allen Dozier was the father of the white enslaving William Stokes Dozier. So I'm trying to work out, was she being coy in saying that it was the enslaver who was kind of the father of her 2 children, John Wesley and Willis? Or did Reverend Allen Dozier have an enslaved child to have the exact same name as his white son? It's possible because it's Edgefield, and Donnie and I have seen this before where that has
Yeah,
happened on numerous occasions.
especially the
So,
Yelldale.
especially the Eldells. And so either one of those scenarios are credible at the moment until we actually continue doing the research. But she said she was sold away from them by Johnson Lowry. Now, that was a name I wasn't really expecting when it came to the Brooks, at least the Brooks family. But we know who the Lowrys are. So, again, that's another person for us to research. To Sam Watson, this is another woman who she just went through it. So she goes somehow from the Dozier family to this Johnson
So,
Lowry to
right.
Sam Watson to Paul Delameyer in Sumter County, Alabama. Now, she said this is where she gives her genealogy. My mother's name was Maria Brooks. I left her in Mount Willing City, South Carolina. I can't remember what county that's in. And she belonged to a Dr. George Yardy. So there's important information for us to research her mother. Her father's name was John Brooks, belonging to Smith Brooks. And Donnie and I figured out there's only one Smith Brooks that could have possibly been, and that's Donnie's ancestor, Preston
Preston.
Smith Brooks. He is the only one that could be. So we have to go back to his records to look for a John. That's not going
Well,
to be
we did
easy.
find one. We did find one.
We did one. We did.
We found one. There was one John that was enslaved by Preston. But the names that she's given, it doesn't match. But
This is
who
where it
knows?
gets interesting because she's been so specific about everything else. Some of it I've been able to verify, and some of it I haven't. But she said she had 5 brothers and 2 sisters. The brothers, for the most part, all have different surnames from her, bar one. There's George Coleman, Richard Ruser, and you and I have never seen Ruser in our Edgefield research.
No.
Philip Christie, Willis Christie. Again, Christie's not really a name that we've seen with any of our family, at least. And then finally, a John Brooks. But she has sisters who have classic Brooks names, Amy and Eliza, but she never names them. But interestingly, she says, heard from them, her sisters, during the war.
I always think that's I always, my ears perk up when one of these ads talk about the fact that they heard from somebody who they were separated from later, because I think that's a really good way for us to think about how enslaved people, nurtured their communication networks, and those were very useful for separated family members to send out word through the grapevine telegraph and to receive word through the grapevine telegraph. This is, there are lots of those reminders in these ads about, how enslaved people used these resources to keep track of one another, even though they were, thousands of miles away from each other. They kept their ears to the ground, and those words were those stories were passed along when that kind of stuff was, of course, illegal for you to be communicating like that. So I always find those references to be very interesting, especially for somebody, it sounds to me, and I might be wrong, but I take it from this first reading of the ad that she was separated young. So she might have been young when she was, she wasn't, because she has a husband. So she would not have been
Well, she still
that
could have
young.
been young. She still could have
Yeah.
been young.
Well, I
She
worked out
still could
she's
have been a teen.
Yeah.
she could have been between 18 to 21.
Right.
Somewhere in that range.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Well, the thing is that when Brian came to us about came to me about her, I immediately, went into the Edgefield slave record book. That book was actually, and I don't think you know about it, Judy, but that particular book was written by a woman named Gloria Ramsey Lucas. And she wrote what she did was she went to Edgefield archives, and she went through everywhere some enslaved person could be written, whether it was a will, probate records, land records, land deeds, whatever, wherever you could find an enslaved person, she wrote it down. And it's, I estimated over 15,000 names in the book. And when she wrote the book, she gave the name of the person, their current owner, their new owner, a description of them if there was a description, and then where she found it and how much they were worth. Now,
Mm.
when Brian was talking to me about it, I immediately went to the book and I where my family is, and there is, I know that my two times great grandmother Martha has a sister named Maria.
Mm.
I already know that. And but Maria had two sons, Rob and Henry. So I still believe that this woman, this particular Maria Freeman, is definitely related. I just don't know how. And it may not be Maria Freeman, it may be Maria Brooks. That just hit me.
Mhm.
Because her mom is the
Mhm.
Brooks, not
Mhm.
her.
No, her father is the Brooks.
Well, I mean, her mom is named Maria Brooks, though.
From because she was with John Brooks. She may be a Brooks under her own
Mhm.
steam, but I'm just
Right.
working that she was the wife of
Gotcha.
John
Yeah.
Brooks.
Right, right, right. So the
But
thing is that we definitely, there's some type of connection there because I know that my two times great grandmother had a sister named Maria, but she doesn't mention any, the names of the siblings that she's mentioning is not the same name of the siblings that we have so far. But because of the kind of people the Brookses were, it is not impossible that their mother was a breeder as well.
Mhm.
So, because
Right.
my two times great grandmother was a breeder, and who's to say that her mom wasn't one too? So it's fascinating. It's definitely fascinating, and I do believe, like Brian said, she is related to us.
Mhm. And I thought Judy brought up a really good point, and it's something we haven't really spoken about that often in the show, is that kind of underground telegraph information system. Because that must have been an enslaver's worst nightmare. Because
Mm,
part of the way that the American chattel slavery system was devised was to scrub that back history out, and to for those of you who were old enough to know your backstory, to make the penalties for talking about it severe. So it's incredible that this information. It didn't happen with this Martha's case, but in some of the adverts, I mean, you're talking about people in Louisiana, the deep, deep South, somehow communicating back with family who are in the Upper South. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, more than you can imagine. That there are these references, and like I said, it's it depends. It seems like it. Even people who are separated quite young sometimes are able to hold on to just enough information to send it back up to Virginia or North Carolina or Maryland or wherever they were from, and get something back. So that's a it's really crucial. And when they place these ads, they're sent, again, they're sort of sending that information back through, back the way it came, and it's stopping all along the way. um, these ads, of course, as you probably noted too, some of the ads will say, preachers in the neighborhood of Woodbury, Tennessee, please read these ads out to your congregation. So the newspapers are then amplifying this information that has been, covertly um, kept, back and forth along the grapevine telegraph, has been communicated along that telegraph. And now, after emancipation can be announced from the pulpit and in the papers.
So my interest, I'm very interested in the transcribers. And like, do you take down information? Because sometimes transcribers are just genealogists who are trying to help make sure everybody get their information. And it could be that one transcriber, like if that one for Maria was not done and I found it and I felt like she was my family member, I would definitely do it. Is there information about the transcriber to see if they're actually connected to the paper that they actually did this, the article that they did the transcription for?
I do think most of our transcribers are genealogists who come across the site. I think most of, well, most of our users are genealogists, and they're the ones that are doing the transcription. We don't keep track of what each transcriber is transcribing, because we have several thousand transcribers registered. I am guessing there is a core of them that are doing a lot of the work, and a lot of people signed up and and then moved on to another project. So I don't know whether or not there's a relationship between those that ads that speak to you on a personal level and those that you decide to transcribe. But we do know that we have some overall data about the way people discover the project. We do ask for that data as people sign up for transcription. We say, how did you come to this project? What's your interest? And most people come to the project because they are doing their own family's genealogy, and they discover that there's this opportunity to help others by transcribing an ad that that can then be searched. You might find it interesting too to note, we actually had some people come to the site too because, and this is fascinating to me, and I haven't really researched it, but some people have come to the site and said they, because of a sense of an obligation to give back. And sometimes they'll say it's a service project or something like that. We have a lot of students who come to us and say, my teacher made me do this. So, some professor will say something like, well, you need to not just use sources, you should be part of the process. But we've also had people who've come to us and said that they're descendants of enslavers. And they came to the project wanting to do something. Which is very interesting, to sort of think about the different ways people approach this project and feel some sort of compulsion to help the project reach more people.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And the other thing that I love about the website, apart from the actual advertisements that it has, is you have an amazing educational resource whole section of the site. If I remember it correctly, there are learning packets aimed at like 4th to 5th graders all the way up to university level.
Yes.
It can feel probably, some audience members watching us on television or wherever might freak out going 4th or 5th grade. I'm going to ask you to talk a lot more about these packets, but as an educator myself, or former academic, it is very age appropriate. There's a real pedagogy or learning structure around each kind of age bracket that the work is aimed for. But what I love is you've kind of done the educator's job for them. I mean, there are templates to download. There's assignments to download. Can you talk some more about kind of what's there and how educators can actually use what's there?
Sure. This is a very exciting part for me too, because I use these ads in all of my classes that I teach. I used to also teach middle school before I taught at Villanova, but I use these ads all the time, and we hear from people all the time that are using them in their classrooms. So what we have now, and really just getting this started, I was telling Danya and Brian earlier on that we are working with groups of teachers now in different parts of the country who are looking at the ads and are starting to develop their own resources, and we will be adding those to the site as well. But what we have right now are some that we developed in-house. And in particular, my colleague, Signe Formy, who's a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, she is my collaborator on this project. She has done a lot of work just in the last 4 or 5 months to update and to add more of these downloadable lessons, in particular the younger lesson, the ones that are aimed at the younger audiences, which we really have to sort of think carefully about what it is that they can, what it is that you can do with the younger audience, younger students. So what we have there now are a couple of lesson plans that we think are appropriate for 4th to 5th graders. Some that just get them to do the hard work of doing just what Brian and Danya were doing, and just sort of reading line by line an ad and thinking about what a primary source is, and how you need to read it carefully, differently than you do a secondary source. You're not reading it like a book or a website or something like that. You're reading it for every little piece of, every clue you can. You're doing that sort of close, careful, critical reading, which is something that students need to learn early on, about primary sources and how to read them and how to analyze them. So these first couple of lessons are really just getting the students to think about what it means to have a source like this, and a source written by enslaved people, not a source written about them, which they have plentiful in their classrooms, hopefully, and their teachers are using them. They should be, but to have a source written by an enslaved person describing their life is very unusual and very important for us to understand. And so those are ads those are the lessons that the younger lesson plans are focused really on getting students to think about what exactly it is, to have a source like this and how one goes about using it. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Listening to you about this, I remember a lot of our followers know I used to drive Uber. And so I would meet a different, variety of people. And one time I was taking this one teacher from New York to Mount Vernon, and we would discuss different things. And I actually told him about the House of Bondage, the Charlotte Brooks book that I told you about earlier. And he explained to me that the school that he teaches at, it's more like a private school, so they take care of their own curriculum. They don't have to necessarily follow the state curriculum. So this is making me wonder, are the people that are doing that are using your curriculum that you have for these younger kids and so on and so forth, are they private schools? Because public schools have to follow a certain thing. And this is not a thing that most public schools would want, right?
Yeah.
Especially now. So is this mostly private schools that are getting this information?
I don't know. We haven't done sort of a systematic survey of where the ads are appearing in what classrooms. But if you open up some of the lesson plans, we talk in particular about the sort of essential skills that are required of all teachers teaching social studies, or teaching history. So that you're supposed to learn it at all levels, like just again sort of identifying what a primary source is versus a secondary source is, without controversy, something that we want every student to learn, is a skill that we want every student to learn just for critical thinking and just to be an informed citizen. So each of our lesson plans correlates with one of these essential skills that really, for the most part, cross state lines and are used in all state curriculums. That doesn't mean teachers can choose their own examples to teach these skills, but we think these ads are particularly useful because and this is really important to think about too, they're typed. So if you actually want a student to look at a primary source, and you're talking about a fourth or fifth grader, and you want them to look at something that was written in the 19th century, it's often handwriting. And my college students at Villanova can't read handwriting. I give them a handwritten source, and they're like, "What do you want us to do with this? I can't read this."
Oh, that's so funny.
So the fact that these are typewritten, they're short. Right. So you're not asking them to read, Frederick Douglass's, slave narrative, which you should, right? But, in a different context, everybody should be reading that. But maybe a fourth or fifth grader, can read just the ad that we were just looking at, from Maria Freedman and get an entire story of a person's life, all sort of condensed into a short ad. So they're short. They're chock full of these, of great clues that you can teach students to stop long enough and just think about each one of them as being an important clue, and where you might go to begin to find out more about each one of those things. So where would you go once you got the enslaver's name? What would be your next step? What would be the question that you would have then after, after finding that next clue? So I think these are particularly useful in the classroom. And plus they're also written, a lot of these ads are written by people who were separated from their parents when they were quite young. So this is an experience that is not foreign to a lot of our students. We know that, we know that in the United States, separating young people from their parents is not, it's not an aberration. It continues to be an American thing. We have students whose parents are incarcerated, and they're not seeing their, they're not seeing their parents. We have children who are separated at the border from their parents. So this is something that is real in many young people's lives. And to have some of these ads written by people who were separated at the same age as some of our own students in our classrooms, it can be meaningful on a whole other level for young people to think about how this is not a new thing.
Actually, just made me think of a psychological point. I don't think I've ever considered it before. So I'm imagining that any one of these people who placed an ad who were separated from their family on their own, those feeling of isolation, because kind of what you're talking about, modern kids having the exact same sense of isolation.
Yeah.
So kind of being able for them to make that connection.
Absolutely. It's trauma. And we know now, what people in the 19th century didn't know, what trauma does to your brain, especially, at all levels, but at a young level, when you are, when you experience a trauma very young, you can miss milestones along the way. It can be something that can live with you. You can have problems with trust later on. There's all sorts of ways in which, we know about what it means that, that people describe in these ads. We know what that meant for them to have those experiences when they're very young, and how that can make it difficult for them to find people later as well, because you can't hold on to information as, sometimes you can't when you're experienced trauma. It's hard to hold on to those informations. You remember some of the traumatic event and you forget other parts because you have to just to survive. You have to sort of kind of piece together memories as you need them. So yeah.
This is awesome.
And one of the other questions I had about the kind of learning packets and the learning resources, what would be kind of one of the takeaways you would want, say, an elementary school age child to have as opposed to, say, a high school age child? Because you would expect those two very different kind of learning groups to have different kind of learning takeaways.
That's a great question. Yeah, so I think for the elementary school students, I think for me, the most important lesson that they should take away from the packets and from using this collection is again, just sort of thinking about what it means to use a source written by and about the people that you are studying, right? So if you're learning about slavery, which you should be in those, in those grades, the 4th and 5th grade, then to have a source written by an enslaved person, a formerly enslaved person, is important to think about what it means to use a primary source. And then when you get to, and that's just the beginning of planting the seeds for beginning to think like a historian thinks. And then by the time they get to the high school, the older lessons, then we are actually asking them to think like historians. So we're asking them to do the work that you and, that Danya and Brian, you were talking about. Sort of, you're not just asking that question about sort of, okay, she named her enslaver. You're then going to go, we provide them with a page from the census in which they can actually see where the enslaver is listed. And then, what does that news source then ask you to think? And what does it mean to sort of think like historians think? So historians approach problem solving by asking questions, not coming with sort of answers that they hope to prove. They come to this with this is a mystery they want to solve, and the questions that they have to ask to solve them. So by the time they get to the high school level, and even in my college classes, I ask them to begin to think like a historian, and also to once they assemble those pieces, to put them together and to begin to create a narrative. So how can you then take the pieces, the census that you found, or or the newspaper article written at the same time as their ad that they took out, or letters that they wrote, or how do you start to piece those things together to begin to see what that person's life was, what was their life like? And also my students at Villanova always want to find out if these people found each other. You pointed to an ad in which, somebody said they found, they got a letter. And so we know that one was successful. But the vast majority of the nearly 4,000 ads, we just don't know. And so the first question my students always want is, can you show me an ad in which we know that they found each other? Because that's a very human desire. Yeah. We want to know that this is solved. But I tell them, no, I can't tell you that. You're going to have to do that work.
Yeah.
Actually, you almost alley-ooped, and I wish we almost may need to have you come back to answer this question. I found something that you said just riveting, and you're saying of teaching students to be historians. I'm going to say, and even though we've just met today, we did have a bit of a chat in the green room, I'm going to assume you're going to talk about your meaning. I'm going to call it historian version 2.0. So not the historians of the past that were very selective and very edited out thing. I don't want to. I'm going to get in so much trouble on Twitter. I don't want to call it white supremacist history, but that's kind of what it is.
It absolutely is.
What it is.
Absolutely.
So yeah, okay, Twitter, go nuts. Just go nuts. I said it.
I got your back.
Thank you. So I'm assuming that what you're talking about is a new kind of historian who actually tells history and not the bits that they like.
Absolutely right. Those are earlier generations of historians, and some of them are still around, who are approaching the past with an agenda for sort of sustaining a status quo, which to this day is about white supremacy. That's not what historians are supposed to do. Historians are supposed to ask questions about from the perspective of of people who lived then, and then to find the best possible sources. For generations, historians simply ignored sources written by or produced by enslaved people, like the WPA narratives that we were talking about, Tanya. For years, historians just said, "Oh, well, we can't really trust those WPA narratives because those people, we can't trust them because they were poor, or because they couldn't read, or because they were old, or because they were too young when they were slaves." They can come up with a million different reasons for not using the source, but but in the end, it comes down to racism. But how do you write about slavery when you're actually ignoring all the sources at your disposal that were produced by the enslaved people? And these ads are to date the biggest collection we have yet, written by and about by formerly enslaved people. So these are 4,000 voices that we didn't have, most of which we don't have anywhere else. And if you're going to write about slavery, then and you're going to be honest and you're going to be a good historian, then this is exactly the sources you should be using.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. And when we shut down, please don't leave right away, because I have another question to ask you. Brian, you want to talk about next week's show?
I am just pulling that up. So basically, next week's show, we're going to be talking about different kinds of research, different kind of record sets you can use, including ship manifests to research ancestors who were sold down into the Deep South. So that is going to be.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just getting ready to say again, Judy, you have been such a wealth of information today, and I know that our audience definitely enjoyed it, and they were listening very intently, as
Great.
I was, because you guys just gave such good information. I'm going to become a registered transcriber. I'm just letting you know that. I'm definitely going to do that, sign up for that.
Great.
So
thank you. And if any of your listeners or viewers have any questions at all about the project, they can email us right there on the site. And we also have social media too. So you can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, and those places as well. But I'm happy to answer any other questions that that anybody who uses the site can have.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Everyone else, we will see you next Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, E360 TV, as well as our YouTube Live and Facebook Live channels. And until then, I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Danya Williams. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, guys.
Take care.
Thank you both.
All right. Stay there. Don't leave us.